Lemon Amiga presents a Play Giant video review. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Hello there once again, welcome to another Lemon Amiga play guide and review. This time we'll be checking out Shadow Dancer. This was developed by Images Software and published by U.S Cold in 1991. This game is basically a conversion of the 1989 Sega game, and this is the high score table, and you can see an adapted image. For some reason he's got a curved blade, you can see on the title screen, but everywhere else he's got a straight sword, so I've no idea where they got that from. And you can see various images as well. On the first level we'll have to get used to the controls, and they're pretty much like Shinobi in the arcades. We can throw Shuriken Star, of which we've got an unlimited number of them. We can crouch around as well, and by pulling back and pressing the fire button we can set the dog on a few of these guys. So we start on our mission in the airport. You can see a nice rendition of a 747 behind us at the airport, and this is my favourite level in the game. It's also one of the easiest as well. By holding down and pushing upwards and downwards, we can also jump onto high platforms and even jump down onto enemies' heads as well, and the enemies will keep on coming until you blow them up. The aim of each mission, I think, is to collect a load of canisters. So you've pressed the space bar there to unleash a smart bomb, and that's supposed to kill everything on the screen, and there are maybe 3 or 4 different smart bomb illusions which pop onto the screen, and those depend perhaps on the level that we're playing. And sometimes you can see the collision detection can be at a premium if you are mid-jump. It's always best to send the dog out ahead, and then it can take out those enemies. Merging out onto the runway before our holiday, we get a nice image of the Concorde, and you can see taking on some of those enemies means the dog minimises, and as soon as we collect our next token, that maximises again, so we can use the dog. And the dog sees fighting with the enemy, but if we jump down there, sometimes the enemy kills the dog, sometimes it kills us as well. If we die, we'll be taken all the way to the start of that level again. Luckily the levels in this game are fairly short, and it's not going to take us too long to get through them, maybe a few minutes. But again, if the dog is battling with the enemy, we jump onto the enemy, we could jump on the enemy's knife, and that's an instant kill, and we only get, I think, 3 lives in this game, and maybe some continues. Whenever our dog barks, we can hold back and press the fire button to send it out, and sometimes we can't duck low enough to avoid certain bullets, so the only way you can get rid of those is to use the magic spell, and that can help us get out of tight situations. And sometimes, no matter what you do, it's pretty difficult to get through it. We've now boarded the plane. Hopefully we can get through this enemy and that's a great effect to see us climbing onto the airplane. Inside the airplane is a boss. This is the easiest boss in the game. I think you're supposed to hit that thing in the head, otherwise it's not going to register any damage. But if we save our special power all the way to the end, then sometimes it can help us. If we really lay into the enemy, I think it's his shoulder actually, if we hit the enemy in the shoulder, the enemy will retreat. Continue now and get 2 free ninja tokens, so we can use those now against the enemy. You can see the enemy stops firing towards us if we can hit the enemy repeatedly. So this being the easiest boss in the game, all you need to do is to lay into that thing and it should fall over it without too much hassle. We get a bonus stage where, just like I think Shinobi, we can fire shurikens up the tower, and as it rises it should take out any enemies. Unfortunately the collision again is a bit dodgy, and once they jump off the near ledge towards us we can't kill them no matter how many shurikens we've got. So the game begins to get fairly cheap once it gets to the end of this bonus round. It throws enemies on our heads. Nothing we can do about that. All we can do is move on to the next stage. Nothing too difficult at this point, and we can jump on enemies' heads, but you've already seen if they fire at that particular level, that height, we're going to have to jump over them. And we've got a particularly weedy jump in this game. This isn't Super Frog, we can only just jump a little bit and we can't usually hop over bullets. If we've got the upgraded shurikens, then the enemies aren't too much of a problem, and you can see we can even jump on this guy's head that will knock him back, and that means we can collect the item without even defeating the enemy. To knock the enemy back onto the token, which isn't great, but we can swipe the enemy as well. If they're really close up, we've got a sword, so we can lunge and swipe at the enemy. But usually the long distance shurikens, of which we've got 10,000 million of them, is usually enough to get rid of them, and some enemies you don't even have to defeat at all. Junkyard we get an oil tanker, and again that's a great effect, and it reminds me of virtually, well, quite a few actually, progressive beat 'em ups on the Amiga. This level it begins to get difficult, as you're going to see, and this level definitely marks the halfway point where it begins to get very difficult indeed, and if you can get through this then it gets even harder from now on. The jumping over the bullets mechanic isn't particularly great, because you can simply jump into the bullets on this particular level, and because they're tiny little things that's great, but sometimes you can't duck low enough, and sometimes you'll pop up just as those things are going overhead and get your head blown off. So the one hit kill in this game isn't really appreciated either. As the sign says, Sega turned me on, step, no pills. difficulty level also carries over from the arcade original and haven't made that any easier whatsoever, I don't think, for the Amiga version. So there is definitely a tactic and a tip for this. If you can send the dog out again, that means they can no longer fire for maybe 3 or 4 seconds, and during that time you can usually jump up and put a star in the back, and that just wipes them off the level. Once they're dead, they are dead, and that means you can move on without anything respawning. See food written on the container on the screen. No idea why a train is carrying a huge block of food, but that one, well, sometimes you can't even discern why he died. Sometimes the collision detection is a nightmare. And so let's fast forward now back through it and let's see if we can get any further. Again, maximum use of those smart bombs, or whatever they are, is definitely recommended. You only get 2 of those, I think, per level and per retry. So if you hit those at a specific point, then it could mean that the levels are very much easier. And the enemy was 2 miles away from us when we died that time. And so sometimes you've no idea why you die in this game. You simply die, and you'll just have to put up with that as a game mechanic and get on with the game. So I'm playing this game with infinite lives now, trying to get through it, and I've put the infinite lives sheet on. Unfortunately, that isn't going to help us much, so this is an unlimited lives challenge from now on. So let's see if we can beat the game with unlimited lives. And let's see if we can get further with it. Look at that, the enemy can go straight through us without damaging us, and yet we can't move 10 inches close to the enemy, otherwise we'll die. And so you can see this particular level is fairly difficult, and I actually didn't manage to get very far with it. When you think you've got rid of one of those guys, it will spawn 2, so if you're not careful you get 3 of these guys on the screen at any one time, and it's very difficult to hit these guys, as we found out. If you can hit that spacebar just at the right point, you'll knock them all out together, and that means hopefully, I think I'm halfway through this level now, hopefully it's just a small hop now towards the end of it. And it appears the way is blocked. Means we're gonna have to try it again. And then the machine crashed and completely froze in one position, so I had to reload the whole thing up again from scratch. cheat we can also have infinite smart bombs, but it must be a pretty difficult game if I'm having to use infinite smart bombs through it. And so this should be somewhere around at the end of the level, and of course I couldn't manage to turn around quickly enough. So that means I'm probably going to skip on to the next level. And so that was a failure. We didn't manage to get through there. And you can see on the original poster, right, the dog is looking pretty scary, but the man's eyes are smiling like Fletch movies. And you can see in the background the guy is actually smiling whilst he's being ravaged by a dog and a sword. So definitely mixed opinions on its scariness on the poster, right? And definitely the guy looks more serious in the actual game itself. Now it looks like we're traversing a bridge, or what looks like should be the Eiffel Tower, but it probably isn't. And we have to get over the bridge just like Greenberry, only like Greenberry it's slightly easier. In fact, this level is much easier than the previous one, only you're going to have to learn how to jump up and down around it. Sometimes the enemies are even immune to our bullets until we fire at them, until they attack us. And this game can be pretty crazy when it comes to things like that. You can be hitting them full in the face, and it won't work. And so you can see the dog jumping up there, trying to get back onto our level. And so if we fall down here, well, we better collect all these tokens first of all. But is this an instant pit of death? Is this going to kill us? No, it's still alive. We're now wading through the water under the bridge, and hopefully we can get around this guy without having to fight him. But I'm not quite sure. No, I don't think it is possible, and so it's pretty difficult to time this when he's lobbing things towards us. Had this game back in the day, probably on copy. I really don't think I bought this on original, and elements of this remind me of Bad Dudes vs Dragon Ninja and things like that. Not really a double dragon game because we're not really fighting people hand to hand. In this case we're more or less rushing through it. Look at that, the guy's destroyed our dog. Do we brave it? Well, we can brave it, but it's a bit too hard. Though this level is slightly easier than the previous one, I'm still going to have to skip it because it's a bit too difficult for me. Let's move on to stage 2.4, where we get to fight a train. And this is another all or nothing battle. If you can fire your missiles onto the headlamp of that train, then it'll blow up. And you can see the feet counting down as well. The train will back us into a corner. But again, if you manage to hit that thing dead on, it will flash and it will stop firing towards us. So all you need to do is hit it dead on a few times and the thing is completely and utterly harmless. So that's one good thing about this game. The first few bosses are actually possible to knock out, even though we haven't really got too much energy. And of course if we use the smart bombs, that should just make everything nice and easy. Fortunately, you don't get any cars to blow up or smashed out or around in this game. What you do get is endless ninjas falling down from the sky and jumping on our heads. And these levels look particularly easy, but you saw I was firing on target, lots and lots of them, and they still collapsed on my head anyway. So I've no idea what you're supposed to do with that. And now on the next level, and from now on we get the added bonus of guys throwing fire towards us, chucking fire on the floor, so that means we're gonna now have to avoid bullets and fire in this game. Luckily the dog can go straight through the fire, and as the guy's dancing with the dog, and it really does look like they're dancing a waltz with these guys. And now look at that, a deep blue one, that means it's even harder than the other ones. Luckily their ankles are the weak point. This level isn't too difficult if you know what to do and if you're prepared to take your time with it. And so that's the hardest thing in this game, taking your time, because if you don't, they'll just gang up on you and you have to do everything by the book. And some of the magazine reviewers complain that this game was way too easy if you knew how to do everything by the book. I don't, unfortunately. So even though I had this back in the day, I never managed to get off stage 2. Sometimes you have to be brave and get in there as quickly as possible in order to defeat those enemies. And what you're supposed to do when 2 enemies are fighting towards you, well, you can die. That's one thing you can do. That's easily done. That's the easiest thing to do in the game. Die. And so you have to wade in and chuck everything towards them until they collapse. And then you've also got a time limit to worry about, so you can't knock around forever. Luckily that time limit is no problem, because, well, it isn't. He's probably not going to live long enough. And at the top of the screen it says we need to save 3 more of those special collectibles in order to complete the level. So just like Robocop 2, we'll have to collect the nukes or whatever they are. Collect them all up in order to beat the level. And of course I'm using up those infinite smart bombs at the moment, trying to get through the level. And as soon as you try to get somewhere further, it throws a harder and harder boss towards us. So even though we've killed these guys, we're still not out of the woods yet. And still it continues. It looks like we're deep underground now, and these guys lobbing the things. It's pretty difficult because the dog isn't barking unless they're pretty near to the target. So maybe we're going to have to time this. And look at that, there's nothing we could have done at that particular moment. And that means we're going to skip on to the next level. Main coder of this game, Steve Howie, also coded Ninja Spirit as well. I think that was another U.S Gold game which came out before this one. I think that was 1988, something like that. And also Back to the Future 2 as well, which had an amazing introduction sequence which was in shop windows of game stores all around Britain, but unfortunately the game stank, so he's definitely not the best coder in the world. On this one we get crocodiles, which is fantastic, reminds us of some kind of Teenage Turtles game, and this is a bit better drawn. I don't mind the graphics, even though they are definitely 16-bit in quality. There's no 32-bitness going on here, or even the hint of it. And again, walking into unavoidable, because we couldn't jump over that, we couldn't duck under it, unavoidable obstacles and enemies is difficult in the game. And now we're facing the 3rd level boss. And this is made even more difficult because I haven't figured out a way to kill this boss, and the boss always manages to kill me. We didn't even scratch the boss on that particular run, so what I'm going to have to do is to use the smart bombs up and get rid of that the easy way, otherwise we're going to be stuck here forever. I don't really want to do that because these games are supposed to be fun, and this game is not fun, it's just a bit too difficult for its own good. I've never actually played the arcade original because this isn't really my type of game, so let's just skip on through this section because it gets boring. That's the third one, so now we're on to level 4.1, and I think there are only 4 worlds in this game. You can see the starting ninja leaps itself off into danger and gets killed straight away, and this level is pretty crazy. So I'm going to skip it and I'm going to move on to those scores. Data Magazine gave this game 57%, Amiga Power awarded it 63%, Amiga Joker gave it a massive 68%, Lemon Amiga, the score is currently 68%, CU Amiga gave this 69%, Ace awarded this game 74%, The One awarded Shadow Dancer 80%, complaining that there were no checkpoints, and Zap gave this 83%, and Amiga Action gave it 84%, which isn't amazing. They downgraded it because they said it was way too easy. And maybe this game is way too easy, but I managed to get through BC Kid a lot easier than this, and I managed to get through many platformers a lot easier than this, even Wolf Child and things like that. So I wouldn't say this is user friendly, and I say the backgrounds, even though it's just 2 frames of animation on that waterfall, it's actually pretty good. But unfortunately for me, it's just a bit too hard, and it compares with the C64 version, which is very similar. So I do have memories of this and trying to play this back in the day, but given this unlimited lives challenge, I'm not doing too well with it. So it's definitely fearsome and difficult, and it can be infuriating as well. So as a game, I'd probably give this maybe 6.5 out of 10 at maximum. I'd have to knock off a whole point simply because of the difficulty and the infuriation of not being able to jump on certain platforms when it looks like you can do, and the infuriation of hitting enemies and simply dying because you haven't got a big enough jump. So that's ridiculous, and unfortunately that's just the way it is. So back in its day, well, if this had come out in 1990, it wouldn't have been too bad, but by the time 1991 came along, there were definitely better games than this. It stinks like an ST port, and it probably was. other hand, it has got good music, and it has got some kind of great atmosphere, especially on the first few levels, and it's great to progress through them, and so you haven't got too many weird controls to worry about and special moves to pull off. It's basically jumping over things, and you can't even jump diagonal in this game, I don't think. You can jump up, and if you try and jump diagonal, you probably just jump into the bullets. So anyway, this is the last boss now, the last level, and of course it's impossible now by the time you get to this stage. That's my unlimited lives challenge completely failed on this game, and so that's my mini play guide and review over with. Unfortunately I didn't get very far with it, but I do remember playing this back in the day, probably cheating my way all the way through it, and so I do have nostalgia for this, definitely the music and things like that. But coming back to this after all these years, I anticipated that it would be a lot easier. Like Turrican 3 gives us a nice view out over the horizon, and then it's back to the highest score table. So thank you very much, we'll see you again in another one sometime soon.